Hey everybody, hope you're having a good day. Yesterday I made a video regarding Ubisoft deleting their, users or customers' accounts and effectively throwing out all the games that were purchased with those accounts. And today this is a bit of an old topic from about 2 weeks ago, I would think. From the Video Game History Foundation. I first saw this video on Yong Ye's channel and I thought it was pretty wild and stuff, but never had the time to cover it or anything. And I decided to look into it myself now. And what I find is pretty disturbing because a lot of the times people always have these arguments that you should only buy the original game. And the problem with that is, what if the original game is never made available to you? And that's what's actually happening here. We see a headline of year 87% missing, the disappearance of classic video games. New study reveals most classic video games are completely unavailable. And effectively what this boils down to is that by this headline, they don't mean it in the sense that you will never be able to play these games. No. What they mean effectively is that the publishers or whoever holds the rights for these games are no longer selling them. So to some extent, I would suspect that abandonware falls in this. I'm an abandonware fan. I dig through there because there's a lot of old games that are really good that, beat most modern day games as far as reaching it from start to end, that is. Obviously, graphics wise and gameplay wise, there's a lot of different changes. But to give you a bit of a pointer on that one, let me just grab this quickly. X-Men Wolverine Origins. This is by far one of the best games ever made. It's a God of War clone, basically, but as far as Wolverine is concerned, this, or in any X-Men game thus far, this is the best game ever made, in my opinion. Everything down to the action, to the gameplay, everything is just Wolverine through and through, and it is voiced by, or Wolverine himself is voiced by Hugh Jackman, so that makes it even much more of a treasure than anything else. Terrible movie, but the game is something else. Now, you can't buy that anywhere. It's been delisted. The only way for you to get it is if you can get yourself a physical copy of the game. And if you're on PC, then it's abandonware. And nowadays, when you think about it, as far as games go, there's so much to pick from and there's so much to choose from. With all these different online services, Nintendo Switch has got their own service as well, where you can pay a subscription fee to emulate games on their hardware instead of just selling you the game outright. So even like PS5 as well, you can play some PS1 games in there, but from what I understand, you can't really pop in a PS1 disc. Correct me if I'm wrong. The PS3 can do it. I mean, that thing is launched in 2006, and you can just put a PS1 disc in there and you're fine. But mind you, PS1 games are still being sold around that time. And if you were lucky enough to grab them, more power to you, basically. So reading back into this article over here, the Video Game History Foundation, in partnership with the Software Preservation Network, has conducted the first ever study on the commercial availability of video games, and the results are bleak. 87% of classic video games released in the United States are critically endangered. Imagine if the only way to watch Titanic was to find a used VHS. Fun fact, I think every household probably had one, but we've got a VHS type of Titanic somewhere. And I don't know if it's like a standard thing for every single household to own one back in the 90s, but I remember for whatever reason, this thing was being like sold left and right. People were buying it. My parents bought a copy for whatever reason, I don't know. And maintain your own vintage equipment so that you can still watch it. I do have a VHS player, by the way. Got two of them, in fact. And what if no library, not even the Library of Congress, could do any better? They could keep and digitize the VHS of Titanic, but you'd have to go all the way there to watch it. It sounds crazy, but that's reality we live in with video games. $180 business in a billion industry, while the games and the history disappear. Just 13% of the video game history is being represented in the current marketplace. In fact, no period of the video game history defined in the study ever cracked 20%. Whoa, 20% representation. So availability rate of historical games by period between 1960 and 2009. So basically, this graph over here shows you as far as games go. Now, obviously from 1960, I would think that when video games were first invented, they weren't like commercially available. They were probably done by enthusiasts, and if you bought the computer, I would suspect it was built into it. I think, I don't know. I was born in 1991, so this onwards is what would apply to me. And this is where it gets wild. I don't remember much of my childhood as far as games went, because we never really visited any stores where you could buy the stuff from. In fact, I know of or knew of a Reggie store which I've only seen once in my entire life when I was a kid. Um, it was in the center of town. We never went into the store, not once, not ever. And then in 2003, our mall opened up here in town for the first time. Reggie's was there, and that was the only way I'd ever actually got to see like physical video games for real as a kid. So that was like in 2003. I was like 12 at the time. So from what I saw, that's what I presumed was always out there. Then I started buying magazines. My dad would buy these PlayStation magazines for me, and I would read about things like the Dreamcast and the Xbox and all these crazy things that I've never seen or heard of, and my imagination would just run wild, you know? And then at that point in time, I realized there's so many things not available to us, and there's a lot of video games which I don't have access to. What I didn't realize was that the entire world was kind of sitting in the same basket as I was. Not in the sense of accessibility, but in terms of availability. At no point in time this thing hits over 25%. Look at this. You couldn't buy more than 25% of commercially, or what was supposed to be commercially available video games at any point in time throughout our history. That's wild. For access nearly 9 in 10 classic games, there are a few options. Seek out and maintain vintage collectible games and hardware. Travel across the country to visit a library, or piracy. This is where things get a bit murky. For example, if you want to go out and buy Silent Hill 1, so let's do this, all right? Let's go to Silent Hill 1 for sale. I want you to have a look at the price of this thing. It is absolutely insane. So this basically, well, for me, this is a South African rand. That's 10,339. So let's just do a rand to US conversion. Wait a minute, doesn't Google have a calculator? So let's pop this up here. Calculator. There we go. So 10,999. So that's like roughly $622 for you to buy Silent Hill 1. And get this, not a single cent of that or penny of that goes to Konami. That is just some guy who's got the game and is selling it to you. That's not even the developers, nothing like that. I mean, Silent Hill Homecoming, that's actually pretty cheap. You can buy a serial key of that. Silent Hill Origins is extremely expensive, and I got this on PS2. It's like almost impossible for you to buy vintage games because of the price bracket. They're insane. They're unaffordable. No one can buy this kind of stuff. Now, as far as emulation goes, I think that is one of the best ways to preserve video games. For me, my PlayStation 1 console died in 2010. I hadn't used it for about 4 years, I would think. And when I decided to put it on, it just wouldn't work anymore. I did get another one later on, but that's going to fail. I've only got one PlayStation 1. I've got a ton of PS2s, and those are going to obviously collapse at some point in time. Same with the PS3 and eventually the PS4. PC, on the other hand, excuse me, PC, on the other hand, is something that is somewhat always relevant. Yeah, the hardware does get outdated quite quickly, by the way. It's still viable though. I mean, I've got a 10-year-old PC over here that I use to play my modern day games. I can play like Spider-Man Remastered at 1080p, averaging like around 40 frames per second on the high settings, which is not too bad for me personally. I can emulate PS2 games on it, not so much PS3 games. They're a bit choppy here and there. I've never tried Nintendo Switch emulation. I should actually give it a try. But on newer PCs, like I've got an AMD PC as well, one of these Ryzen type ones, and I did try to emulate PlayStation 3 on there, and I was surprised. You could actually get a game running at like 30 frames per second at 720p. It doesn't matter what it's like. Like, I think it's Demon's Souls that is. You can play the game, and it's preserved. It's there for you to keep and go on with. But the problem with it is, it's done via emulation. Now, companies don't like that. Most video game companies hate that because, in their mind, it's illegal. And I get it. Piracy and emulation to some extent is obviously quite illegal. If you don't own the original game and you're emulating it, then you've downloaded a pirated copy effectively. Now, I know that some games like Power Stone on the Dreamcast, I'm pretty sure that that's stuck to the Dreamcast. You can't get it anywhere else. But you can buy some games like Daytona USA. That's available like on the PlayStation 3 store. Obviously, I don't think you can buy anymore. I haven't bought games from there in years. And it makes you wonder and makes you think about things really carefully. Excuse me. To what extent are you going to lose out on? Oh, sorry, I just have this weird pain in my chest. To what extent are you going to have access to these games if these sites get taken down? Like a lot of ROM sites exist out there, and they do a good job at preserving the video games. Obviously, it doesn't have every ROM in the world, but it doesn't change the fact that at some point in time, those things are going to be taken down. I think there was a site called Emu Paradise a couple of years ago. Nintendo went after it and completely shut down. You can't download anything from there. I'm not too sure if they even had like these old manuals of magazines at one point that I could download from them, but that's another story for another time. Anyway, this is where libraries and archives should come in. Anyone should be able to easily explore, research, and play classic video games in the same way that they can read classic novels, listen to classic albums, and watch classic movies. But outdated copyright laws are preventing institutions like ours from doing our jobs. And this is the truth about it. There's no leeway. With a lot of laws around the world, they haven't adapted to take into account the current day technology that we have, as well as the technology that we're losing out on. Like a lot of rules that were written in a time before these things were even thought of. It was written in a time before the digital era, you know? Back then, when copyright laws were somewhat written for a lot of places in the world, it was always written on the basis that you had something that was physical and tangible that you could always just pass off and sell and trade off. They did not take into account things that you could do on the internet to a complete extent. I mean, there are copyright laws, yes, that protect certain things on the internet, but at the same time, those laws also prevent things like this from happening, whereby you get to preserve what is effectively a dying media. Whether you look at it, no matter how you look at it, if video games were not a dying media, this pie chart would have been in the reverse. We would have had access to 87% of the games, whereas 13% of the games would have been inaccessible. But this chart as well shows you the viability in terms of sales for these companies. The reason why these games are available is because these are the only games that they are probably making money from. The rest of these games are either from companies that no longer exist, straight up abandonware, or just aren't profitable to the gaming companies that, well, manufactured them and distributed them previously. They're just making no money at all for them. So that's the thing about it is, normally, like with our legal system in particular, whenever you sue somebody, you are normally put into the position that you were before you had damages. So it's restorative justice, in other words. It's not speculative, in the sense that if you've lost $1,000, you can claim $1,000 plus your legal costs with some interest on that. You can't now go and claim, like, if you've lost nothing, you cannot now go and claim billions from somebody else. Obviously, that works different in different legal systems. So in America, I would assume that Nintendo would probably sue you and maybe take your kidney away if you were to play like Super Mario 2 on an emulator in front of them. You know, they'd probably just cut the kidney out anyway, right there while you're playing the game, and then, I don't know, do whatever they want with it. Goal of this study: get expanded exemptions for libraries and organizations preserving video games, which are currently far more limited than the ability to preserve books, movies, audio, etc. How the study helps: the video game industry's main lobbying group has successfully argued that to U.S. Copyright Office that the industry already does enough to preserve its own history commercially, and the additional protections for preservation institutions would hurt their bottom line. We proved them wrong. The industry has actually only managed to make 13% of its history available, and it's unlikely to get better. The argument that these games are commercially available is what's keeping video games behind in the preservation world. That these games are commercially available is what's keeping video games behind in the preservation world. So basically, the takeaway from this is that the argument here is that stores exist where you can buy games from. But the problem with that argument is that not all of the games manufactured by, for example, Nintendo is available there. You can't buy everything that they've ever made, and you don't have access to it. And obviously the cost factor versus like actually hosting this kind of stuff, because you gotta understand, you still have to pay for bandwidth and servers and things like that. other security measures got to go into place, all those kind of things to make sure that something doesn't go astray on the online store. So these things have to be managed and basically tightly held together and watched over to prevent any breaches and stuff like that. So it's kind of difficult for them in the sense to provide a 50-year-old game to that one guy who wants to play it on their store and who may not find some way to hack into the store through that. I don't know how it's possible. It might be maybe there's a backdoor vulnerability because nobody's buying the game, so they ignore it and then they don't do their proper security measures. I don't know. Maybe. I'm still learning about coding and all that. Fun fact: I'm learning about coding. But yeah, it's a different take when you look at it though. This whole 87% of the thing, it kind of hits you really hard in the face because growing up, I always thought that, whatever was there that was it. And then obviously the next generation came in, that was it. I didn't realize to what extent we never had access to certain things. I mean, I get that on these digital storefronts, you get like PlayStation 2 games that you can buy for the PS4, for example, but they're absolutely god awful. If you hack your PS4, you can get a better chance at actually getting games to run. Your PS2 games, that is, even with glitches, but you can still emulate it. But yeah, the next rulemaking proceeding under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, DMCA, the internet's favorite four letters. So anyway, blah, 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 2004. Of the new code is scheduled for 2004. Okay, we're hopeful that this study will incite change and the video game preservation will become stronger before we lose more. Survey of the video game reissue market in the United States was conducted for Video Game History Foundation and Software Preservation, Full Salvador, published 2023. And, well, these are the people who volunteered to get this thing underway. And this is where it is so crazy that people had to volunteer to go through this, do all of this research, and still advocate for getting laws passed to get video games preserved. My opinion about this is companies are not benefiting from this, but chances are they're not losing either. They don't care about things that don't make them money. That's effectively it. I mean, yeah, if you were the creator of a franchise, if you created like Tekken, for example, chances are it'll hit you a bit harder if your games just suddenly disappeared and evaporated out of existence, But if the creator of a franchise is long since gone, like the company that created the game doesn't exist anymore, or the person whose idea it was no longer exists, so they sold the idea off to somebody else who doesn't really care about it, unless these companies are making money or profit off of these video games, they're not going to bother with preserving it. You must understand, for them, why should they allow you free access to like Mario 64 when 20 years from now they can sell you a subscription service at some exorbitant price just to play the game again? Why should they bother with giving you a game from like 30 years ago when at some point in time they're just going to go to a ROM site, download the ROM themselves, host it on their services, and then make you pay for it? They've done it before. It's another story for another day, by the way. I'll make another video on that one. So yeah, quick facts. 87% of games and classic games are not in release and are considered critically endangered. Availability is low across platform and time period tracked by the study. Libraries and archives can digitally preserve but not digitally share video games and can provide on-premises access only. Libraries and archives are allowed to digitally share other media types such as books, films, and audio and are not restricted to on-access premises. The Entertainment Software Association, the video games industry lobbying group, has consistently fought against expanding video game preservation within libraries and archives. So this is where it gets a bit interesting. Why don't they want video games preserved? That's my whole thing about it. Aside from the fact that I get that it doesn't make any money. Is it that there's just too much to preserve, to keep over? Could it be that it's possible that maybe you could just sneak in a virus with a certain ROM and then leave it there in the library to rot away, and then some unsuspecting person unleashes this thing on the world and everything just turns to hell? That could be one thing, maybe. It could also be, like I said, storage, the cost, all those kind of things. Viability. It could also be that these guys don't want to mess with companies like Nintendo. Because, yeah, it is within their right to sue you and to take away a huge portion of money away from you. Like I was about to say they can take away your kidney if they wanted to. It's a metaphor, by the way. When I say take away your kidney, I mean that the amount of money they can take away from you, it's probably equivalent in value or more, just for backing up their games, I would assume. Um, I think these probably, I don't know, the ESA is afraid of Nintendo, and if other companies decide to follow suit, because I don't think it's going to be too long from now. Give it like another 20 years, and I would think like the PS1 and PS2 libraries would probably be lost to time forever if they're not preserved digitally or not available on any stores. Um, I can honestly find a lot of examples where this may happen, but I think this is just draw the video out for far longer than it should be drawn out. So yeah, I'm gonna leave the video there. If you like to, leave a thumbs up. If you hate it, leave a thumbs down. What do you think about this? Do you think we're losing out or we're gaining? And is it up to us individually to preserve gaming? Like, I'm doing my best with all the physical copies, and then I've backed them up to my own hard drives, and that's it. Whenever I want to play my PS2 games, it's always on an emulator. And I've got like 8 PS2s, I think, 8 or 9 of them. So, and well over like 300 games, physical games. But yeah, I'm gonna leave it there. See you next time. Bye.